What's behind the startling statistic that 2/3 of U.S. high school graduates are neither career nor college ready? And how is this connected to the politics of education in America today? How is offering children educational options that are tailored to them and their realities, especially with the use of new technologies, changing things? And what can educators learn from the Lindsay School District in California, which transformed itself dramatically to deliver results? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today we sit down with Kevin Chavous, a leading school choice advocate and president of K12, a company that partners with U.S. schools to offer personalized education programs. He was also a founding board member of the American Federation for Children. We discuss what he believes can be done to reform the troubled U.S. educational system. Kevin Chavous, great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's so good to be with you, Jan.
So, you've been a passionate school choice advocate for years. In fact, some of that work I think started right here in DC. Before we jump into that stuff, can you tell me a little bit about how you see the state of education in America right now?
Well, Jan, I'm going to tell you, there are a number of high-performing schools in this country, kids who are doing well, school districts that are changing and improving. But the reality is, as former Education Secretary Arne Duncan said, the picture of education in America is a picture of stagnation at best. We have a lot of our kids who aren't getting what they deserve, a lot of schools that aren't performing as well as they should. And it's not that the kids are failing. I think we're failing the kids. And to give you one important statistic, 2/3 of America's high school graduates are neither career nor college ready. So that means most of the kids, the vast majority of American school-age children who have a high school degree, which has been certified and given them a stamp that they're ready for the world, aren't ready for college, and neither are they ready for a career. I think that's shameful. And I think that particularly when you look at the fact that most high school graduation rates are increasing in just about every state, it shows us we're graduating a lot of kids who just aren't ready for the world.
That's astounding to hear. And how does a situation like this arise?
Well, I tell you, I think that at one point in time, and you can go back to the origin of this country when Thomas Jefferson believed that the only way citizens could survive and democracy could survive is through an educated population. That planted the seeds to make sure that we valued education. And for many years, we had a culture of education, but we had challenges. We had asterisks for slaves, for working class people. The quality of education wasn't what it should be. And then what has happened more than anything now is we've accepted. We used to have a culture of this can-do spirit where, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get an education, you can receive your piece of the American dream. But now, Jan, what has happened is we have this acceptance of mediocrity. We've dumbed down. And again, we have great schools. So I don't want to cast a wide, broad swath, but the bottom line is this acceptance of mediocrity and the fact that it's okay for so many of our kids not to get what they deserve, I just think it's unacceptable. And to me, the real American dream, the real culture should be grounded on the fact that each and every American school-age child should have equal access to a high-quality education. And I think that over time, we've just allowed our lack of focus and priority attention given to quality education for all children has gotten worse.
As I understand it, education is largely governed at the state level. So I find is this a situation that's across all the states? Are there some states that are just doing fantastically well and others that are doing exceptionally poorly? Or how does that look?
Yeah, I think that we have states that are doing well. Obviously, Massachusetts has always been one of the leaders. I think Florida's doing some really cool stuff. There are a number of states. Indiana, I think, is doing making some improvements. But I think what has happened around the country is the way we value education has changed in an odd kind of way with the advent and increase of technology. Right now, the imagery that a lot of young people have in front of them tells them that they can make it, if you will, or be successful without an education. You know, and so you have these images where on YouTube, you know, you can have a kid who jumps in a in a pool full of jelly and have 1 million views and make a few $100,000 a year in advertising dollars. I mean, so it's created a little conundrum. And then I think the biggest challenge we've had is just this over allegiance to a one-size-fits-all way of education, where kids come into a classroom, they sit still. It's a stand and deliver format where the teacher just teaches to the kids. Kids have to be still, record what they get, regurgitate it back in a couple weeks, then forget it a month later. And now with technology, there's this real need to understand that one size fits all doesn't work for all kids. Some kids, like for instance, most American school-age children take algebra in the 9th grade, but their mother and grandmother and great-grandmother did. Today, with the dynamism associated with technology, what's wrong for a kid taking it in 6th grade? Or maybe a kid should wait till 11th grade. Well, the challenge with that is most school districts are set up where the personalized learning aspect of things just it's hard for them to adopt, because we've embraced this factory approach to herding kids and dividing them based on age, grade level, and all the like. So I think there are a number of reasons, but the bottom line is those states that are seeing some improvement and change, they've taken a radical approach to embracing more options, more quality options. Maybe charter schools are okay, maybe home schools, maybe specialty schools, maybe private schools, maybe virtual schools. So there's a lot that you can do if you're open to innovation and creativity that really will meet the kids we need to meet where they are today.
It seems like a lot of people that have benefited from the charter school system, let's start with that, but believe in it, basically, or have become advocates, so to speak. But there also seems to be quite a bit of resistance from what I've seen. And so can you kind of unpackage that for me a bit?
It's interesting because one thing we have to keep in mind, I think one of the biggest barriers to educational change, or the change in the realities of education in America, is the politics of education. Okay. And there's no Republican or Democratic way to teach a kid how to read, write, or count. Yet we allow the partisanship to dictate education policy. And I can tell you that resistance to change in education is equally bipartisan.
Okay.
And so depending on where you go state by state, you have among many rural Republicans, they live in school districts or in districts where the school district is the largest employer. So they're going to fight against change. And then for a lot of progressive Democrats, they have the teachers union supporting them. So they're really resistant to anything that the union doesn't agree with. And oftentimes, a lot of union folks are resistant to charter schools and choice. My view is that this is an area and an issue where we should rise above the politics of the day and create this American passion around what's best for children. And so the yardstick that I use to determine what I'm going to support that will help kids is, will this proposal help a child or a group of children learn? And if the answer is yes, I'm for it. Because I do think with the number of children we're losing because they haven't got the education they deserve is so striking and so threatening to our democracy and our country's future that I just don't think we should be so overwhelmed by the politics. But I think that the biggest challenge we have is the politics of education.
What are some initiatives that are looking at changing that, reforming that?
Well, what's really cool about what's happening in a lot of places is where you see rural Republicans, urban Democrats come together around either charter school proposals, school district reform proposals, embracing, I'm involved in helping to guide and run a virtual education company, virtual education, specialty schools, magnet schools, home schools. You feel that many legislators understand that in their various districts, one of the biggest challenges they have is getting skilled workers. You're not going to get skilled workers if 2/3 of your graduates can't go to college or get a skill. One thing that we're embarking on that we really feel is totally bipartisan, and that's just part of the promise of what the future holds, is career readiness. We have, in our Wisconsin school, we created a career readiness program with the Operators Engineers Union. They're the crane manufacturers, crane operators. And they were only getting 20 to 30 kids in a class, or students, and they would come from all over the state, and the enrollment of the students were going down. But now through virtual education, we can get 100, we can get 200 in a class. We work with the union, we work with business leaders. Kids take the class, early in high school. They get their certifications. And through, not just on the academic side, but through virtual reality, artificial intelligence, they get their skill development, they get their internship, and they graduate with a job. That's just one illustration of what's possible when you lay aside the politics, you embrace innovation, creativity, all designed to meet the individual needs of children first. And I think there's more promise in that. We work with a number of school districts. Now you see school districts starting their own charter schools, or school districts working to start their own virtual programs, their own magnet schools. We have to be open to trying something new, because the one-size-fits-all just isn't going to work.
Tell me a little bit about, let's say, the success of charter schools before we kind of dive into this more kind of personalized, individualized piece. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I can tell you our experience in D.C., which I think is instructive. I was on the D.C. City Council at a time we were going through the crack epidemic of the 90s. And what really changed my career, Jan, was when I visited our local prison, and I met a number of the young men, and many were in there for nonviolent crimes, drug offenses, and I got to know them. I said, wow, some of these guys are pretty bright. And I asked the warden, the head of our prison, I said, what kind of education programs do you have for these young men? And he said, oh, Councilman, that'd be a waste of time, because 90% of them are high school dropouts and they can't read, so it'd be a waste of taxpayers' money to try to educate them. Wow. And so that changed my view, and I started to visit schools in my ward, and at the time, D.C. statistically had one of the lowest performing school districts. And ironically, that's when I said, I wanted to take this on. It just really bothered me. And we were considering a charter school bill, charter school legislation. And what hit me was when I talked to folks who were advocating for this new approach in charter schools, they were talking about ways to do like a residential school, or hospitality high school, where we had folks like Bill Marriott, because Marriott is based in D.C., and others in the hotel and restaurant industry agreeing to give internships and jobs to kids who went to this hospitality high, and they could learn about the hospitality industry. And when I heard and saw these innovative school leaders talk about how they would put this together, the one thing I noticed that was a common theme, there was no bureaucracy. They had an idea, a vision, they had a board, they had a principal, and then they would execute. In the school district in D.C., great ideas, but you had to have 4 or 5 people check a box. You had a bloated central administration.
Right.
And it was a barrier to getting some things done. So one of the main reasons why we've had such a successful charter school movement in D.C. is we took away a lot of those barriers and a lot of things that really would impact on kids getting what they deserve instantly without having 4 or 5 people sign off on it, or without people trying to put it in a factory box, if you will, was just having people just do it. And I think what has also happened, and some people may disagree, but I think the evidence is clear, once the charter movement got some traction in D.C. and parents started to choose it, then you saw the school district in D.C. having to respond. And they started to send people out knocking on doors saying, we can educate your kids too, which is, I think, the way it should be. We should not have a situation where only one education provider has total access to all the kids. Because then what happens is, if that education provider doesn't meet the needs of all the kids, then those kids who are left behind really are left behind.
So that's kind of your solution in a way to reforming the public school system, I guess, right? To just provide competitive impetus or something like that.
Yeah, I think, look, in education, less is not more. More is more. So if you've got a kid who's bullied and they can't sit in a brick and mortar school, or if you've got a kid with medical challenges or special needs or autistic, they can't sit in a classroom. And many of those kids just can't, their needs cannot be accommodated. We at my company, we handle a lot of those kids. Or if you have a kid who really responds better to small classes, and maybe they have an interest in arts or entertainment industry, then what we need is a more robust and vibrant set of offerings. Just like when you go to a buffet line. If you go to a buffet line to eat and you only have chicken fried steak, a lot of people may not like chicken fried steak. But if you have, the fish, the steak, the potato, you have all this stuff, 20, 30 offerings, you're likely to get more people to want to sit there and eat at that buffet table, that restaurant. And just as we see a diversity in terms of the needs of children, Jan, we see less of a response to that diversity by giving offerings that they will respond to. And another thing, I think that today's kids with technology, all these kids have these smartphones and they respond to gamification and badges and coins. I mean, we've seen that in order to engage students, you just can't say, here, read Lord of the Flies or, read A Tale of Two Cities and do a book report on it. There's experiential learning, there's project-based learning, there's robotics, there's coding, there's virtual reality, augmented reality, there's artificial intelligence. There's all these things that you can use technology as a way to be the right tool to create that hook for the kids who are often unengaged. And, I just feel that if we looked at education more in terms of what's possible as opposed to what we can't do, then we'll be more attractive to kids who oftentimes feel stuck because they're put in a box like their parents were.
That's very fascinating. So you've kind of started giving me the answer to this, but how do you envision the future of American education and how does the public education fit into that amidst this myriad of options that you're describing?
Well, I think first and foremost, and we're seeing it around the world, that the buzzword should not be finding a way to fit kids in a system. The buzzword should be finding a way to offer personalized educational opportunities for all kids. And school districts can do that. I can tell you there's a fascinating story, Jan. The Lindsay School District, it's a migrant workers community between Bakersfield and Fresno, California. Okay. They've got about 15,000 people, and the average educational attainment of these residents is 6th grade. Many of them are undocumented. But what the Lindsay School District has done, when their superintendent realized they had 9 straight valedictorians who had to take remedial class in college, 9 straight. They were one of the worst performing school districts in California. And it was a poor community. And they said they were going to embrace a personalized learning concept. And I talk about Lindsay because there's some charter schools doing some great things, some private schools doing some great things. There's some traditional schools doing great things. But Lindsay is an example of one of the lowest performing school districts in California, indeed in America, that changed its approach from a system approach, where kids have to be forced to fit within that system, to a personalized learning approach, in which they tailored everything toward the needs of kids. So they, first of all, set up this approach where kids were entrusted upon making sure that they could follow their courses. Let's say there were 30 things you needed to know in U.S. history, 25 things you needed to know in algebra. These kids would be instructed on that. They work at their own pace. They could work with the teacher. They work online. They could work in a group setting, project-based. And when I sat with those students and they showed me how they were progressing, how much they enjoyed school, the truancy went to 0. They had nearly 40% of the kids were going to school before they instituted this personalized learning approach. Then it went up to 95%. They had no gangs. They had healthy start on all the campuses. There was this idea that you had to not only educate kids, but you had to create relationships and provide the social services, particularly in a community like that, that would educate the whole child. And then they empowered the kids. Okay. They said, look, you can do this. And the teacher was part of their guide, as opposed to them sitting still in a classroom and listening to a teacher and looking for the bell to ring. And the results have been phenomenal. I mean, real quickly, they've had, I think, triple the college admissions. They also have more and more kids, trying to come to school, to this Lindsay School District, as opposed to in the past when they had people trying to leave the Lindsay School District. But the most striking thing of all of this, Jan, is they did something pretty radical. They did away with grades. They don't offer any grades. They just know that if you make it through those 30 things you're supposed to know, and you take the test in history and math and English or what have you, and mastery is the key, then you will be ready for college. And I asked them, well, how does not having grades affect your college admissions and your applications? They said, it doesn't affect it at all, because the kids all test well because they know the material. They wanted to destigmatize things because they realized so many of their kids were behind. When they set up that personalized learning for them, they did it based on that child's need, not based on the blueprint. So, I know that sounds strange to people, but I think the future of education, Jan, is us moving in the direction of creating an approach to education for all children that fits that child, wherever they are in the learning curve.
Because this sounds to me like not having grades as a concept. It could work in two ways. One way is it doesn't matter how you perform, you pass. And that kind of sounds like what leads to statistics like you were describing earlier, right? On the other hand, this seems an approach where you're not using grades, but there are some kind of serious milestones that people have to hit to make it to the next stage.
Yeah, that's what struck me. I was a little taken aback when they said no grades. I said, well, how do you measure? That was my grounding. But when the kids said, look, we know I'm at 25. If I don't get to 30, then I'm not going to pass this class.
I see. So it's actually, there are grades. It's a bit of a different model.
A different model, yeah. So I have to keep doing it until then I can move on. But what's interesting is the confidence it gives these young people, and the fact that they believe in what's possible. And that's largely that they're going to make it through.
So how do we reform the public school system?
I think we have to stress the importance of education. We reform the public school system by creating a culture around education that's not tied to dollars and cents. It's not tied to the way it used to be, but it's tied to making sure that all children are valued and all children matter. And the reason why that's important, there's this tendency to think of, the public school system as an entity that has to be preserved at all costs in its current form. Right. My view is that whatever the public school system looks like now, that's fine. But for the world of tomorrow, it has to look different. It has to have a greater usage of technology. There has to be more project-based learning. There has to be more opportunities for kids to get dual credit or career readiness credit outside of the traditional school. There has to be more, I think, outside talent working inside schools to help kids, particularly when they decide they want to go into certain careers or be exposed to certain careers. And I think the biggest thing traditional school districts have to move toward, and it's a tough conversation, is less of a bureaucracy that impacts on the day-to-day of kids. I understand the bureaucracy for facilities, or transportation, and those kinds of sort of day-to-day needs. But I think for public schools to thrive and excel, when it comes to academics, you have to get to the place where you value teachers, and that means you also have to get quality teachers. Now, I've said that if you want to really move toward improving the caliber of teaching, not just in traditional public schools, but all over, so you have to find ways to incentivize teachers, and I think we need to professionalize our teaching corps. When I talk about professionalizing our teaching corps, it's similar to, I'm a lawyer or a doctor. We have self-policing. And if a lawyer, violates the code of ethics, you can get disbarred. If a doctor commits malpractice, you can go before the medical boards and lose your license. Same with accountants, same with a lot of professionals. I think, a lot of teachers really believe in the tenure, but I think if we could professionalize our teaching corps, give them more money, individual teachers, but in exchange, they need to engage in some self-policing and be willing to go through the steps of decertifying teachers who they know don't perform. Right. I think it would make a big difference. And by the way, that was something that was recommended 30 years ago in A Nation at Risk. And many union folks, Randy Weingarten has told me she supports that. But it's not a big enough priority, I think. But we need to have that discussion. I think that will go a long way toward at least getting people to know that, one, we need to value all kids, and two, we need to value teachers. And one of the best way to value teachers is not just to incentivize them, but also make sure that the teachers around them are operating at a level that's worthy of what the kids need.
So the Lindsay School District, I guess, would be a kind of a case study of some of these reforms that you're describing, right?
That's right. Jan, what's interesting about Lindsay, when I talked to the superintendent, when he found out that those 9 straight valedictorians had to take remedial courses, and he had a parent come to him and point to his son and said, "This is your graduate, and my son is your graduate. He can't read." And then he walked out of the office. It was like a thunderclap to this superintendent. And he told me that the one thing they did, they said, well, we got union rules, we got a school board, we got a mayor. He called a meeting, and he brought all the school board members, all his teachers. In that small town of 15,000 people, he sent flyers around in the community, had about 3,000 people on a Saturday. Unbelievable in this room on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And he told the story about the parent who showed him his son who couldn't read, and about the valedictorians who had to take remedial courses. And then he put on the wall in the blackboard, he said, what should be a profile of the Lindsay High School graduate? What should they know? And he started talking about these core values. And he said, look, I'm saying it right now, we need to throw out everything we've done and start from scratch. So that they divided the community, they picked 4 or 5 areas, and they had people, those 2,000 or 3,000 people in the room would come every Saturday in their area. And it took them a year, and they created the Lindsay School Reform Plan, which was totally different than what any other school district has done in the country.
Fascinating.
And it has led to amazing results because they were not governed by the politics. And it was, he said there were tough conversations with the school board and the union, but the community was almost small enough and manageable enough, and people knew that they were having so many challenges. And frankly, the leadership of the superintendent was such that he just said, we've got to change. And, I referred to them a lot in one of my books, that this idea of putting kids first is not a slogan.
Right.
It's a state of being. Mm-hmm. And I do think that oftentimes the politics of education is more slogan-driven than action-driven for kids. And I think that what they did was pure action.
Oh, fascinating. And I was curious about this. Does this mean this very personalized model which they've implemented, does that mean a lot more teachers are there doing that work? How did the immediate question is, how does the budget work with this kind of highly personalized?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and it was a question I asked. First of all, they did not have to get more teachers. They had certified teachers in the classroom. They had teachers' aides and teachers' assistants. I think they beefed that up. You know, one of the beautiful things about how they were able to make sure they met kids where they were and where they are is they had these readiness tests. So early on, as soon as the class started, the teacher could sort of diagnose where kids were. And those kids that were high achievers, they could let them go on their own and see if they could do it. For those who were sort of in the middle of the road, maybe the teacher would engage in some direct instruction with them. Those kids that were 1, 2, 3 grades behind, they'd have more intensive hands-on involvement with the teacher and teacher's aides. And so they would do that and make sure the kids were following where they were. The kids who were behind, they would help work with them more aggressively, intensively, try to get them on track. And then the real cool thing they would do is project-based learning, where they would group kids in pairs or with 3 or 4 kids at a time, because a couple of those things on their mastery list they had to do as a group. And what was really fascinating when I saw these kids who were high achievers, who were paired with kids who had challenges, and them coming together, and it was really exciting to see how much they learned from each other. And so they really created this community of learners where kids weren't segmented out based on their aptitude or where they were when they started, but how they could all come together and learn as a unit. It was really powerful.
It seems like something that was really important here was the fact that the community was of a size that they could kind of handle it. And perhaps even, you know, there was accountability, like, hey, wait a sec, you're not on board with this? Hey, get on board, neighbor. You know, it's that kind of deal. Whereas in a bigger city, that kind of thing maybe is harder to find. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's been a part of our challenge. That's the tension, Jan. But I also think that there is an enterprising group of younger superintendents coming up who recognize that the status quo and the way we've done things just doesn't work. And, you know, I've seen the Lindsay School District Superintendent talk to a number of these young superintendents. And I think you just have to start. So part of it is if you get a principal who takes this on, or you get a little bit of a larger school district, the leadership matters. And so as, you know, there are some of these groups like Chiefs for Change, they're the group of superintendents around the country that are pushing for change. You've got some small school district superintendents on it and some large school district superintendents. They're starting to embrace these ideas. We almost have to start like a domino approach. And now, because Lindsay's having so much success in California, you're seeing larger school districts, you know, look at, well, what's going on in Lindsay? The bottom line is the explosion is going to happen. It's similar to, you know, the Berlin Wall. We just can't sustain it the way it's been thus far.
Okay. The explosion being the explosion of success?
Explosion of success. Yeah.
The explosion of failure.
Yeah, explosion of success, because we're at the place now where, you know, our very survival from a political point of view, but frankly from a practical humanistic point of view, is so dependent on us making sure that our children
quality education.
Get a quality education.
Right.
That is the most important thing.
What in your ideal world will happen in the next, let's say, year to get us closer? In your ideal world?
In my ideal world, I would hope, and this is going to sound so foreign to people. This is going to be one where some people are just going to turn off their televisions, okay?
Okay. Hey, don't do that.
But let me tell you in my ideal world that if we could get 2 of the presidential candidates on both sides, once the nominees are set, to actually have a joint press conference and say, you know what, we disagree on so many things, we're going to have a robust debate. But the 2 of us have decided that on education, as it relates to education of our children, we're going to work together and take the politics out of education to make sure that every child learns. So the 2 of us, the Republican and Democratic nominee, we're going to sit down and come up with 2 or 3 things we can agree on that will drive the way we approach education for the coming years. Now I'm going to tell you, Jan, that won't happen, but if it did, it would set a different tone.
It's a very optimistic vision you're offering. Kevin Chavous, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.